In this lecture, we are going to talk about where you can obtain financial data. The first thing I want to mention in this lecture is the obvious thing. That is, if you already work in finance, then you'll have access to lots of data through your company. If that applies to you, then you don't need this lecture. It's worth noting at this point that, because finance is such a competitive industry, data is not free. Some companies collect and curate data, while others pay those companies for their data. If you look at other areas of machine learning, the same kind of idea applies. Sure, you have your MNIST and your ImageNet and your chest X-rays, but these are well-known public datasets. Companies on the bleeding edge of machine learning also have secret repositories of data. For example, you might imagine that companies in the self-driving industry have proprietary data they've collected from their own vehicles. Companies making speech-to-text software might have their own repository of voice data. For these companies and companies like these, they wouldn't want to share their data because that's their competitive advantage. Same thing goes for finance. Although, generally speaking, most machine learning researchers tend to be pretty open with sharing their data and their code. I want to give a special mention to a company called Quandl, which is a very popular resource for financial data. Quandl has their own API, which can be accessed through simple HTTP requests, or with language-specific libraries like Python, R, and even Excel. Some parts of Quandl are free, and some are not. Broadly speaking, Quandl data is split into two parts, which are core financial data and alternative data. Alternative data is for institutional clients only, which is probably not you. Nonetheless, alternative data is probably the most interesting data when you really want to gain an edge. We'll discuss more about this later in the course. So, core financial data contains the stuff you would be interested in this course, such as daily stock prices, and it even contains fundamentals data. Just as a short aside, fundamentals data is data that we are not going to look at in this course, but that could be used in a machine learning context. Fundamentals data includes both quantitative and qualitative data about a company. Information such as profitability, revenue, assets, liabilities, and growth potential are considered fundamentals. Some specific numbers that financial analysts use are the debt-to-equity ratio, or DE ratio, and the price-to-earnings ratio, or PE ratio. Since we will not be looking at this kind of data in the course, it won't be discussed further. In terms of Quandl's other core financial data, you'll find that it comes in two tiers, free and premium. Premium data is the data that costs money, and each data source is priced separately, so you can pay only for the products that you want. Note that the pricing is on a subscription basis, so you would pay some monthly fee or some yearly fee. If you're interested in using Quandl for yourself, this is what I would consider to be a regular programming exercise. Basically, you read the documentation, look at the examples, and as long as you know how to program, it shouldn't be too difficult. But note that we will not be using Quandl in this course. I just wanted to let you know of its existence, so that if you want to do your own research in the future, this is one place you could look. Another popular data source is Quantopian. This is not a repository of data per se, but rather it is a platform that allows you to test different trading strategies. Your code actually runs on the platform, so of course it ingests data as the backtests are being performed. Finally, we're getting closer to what we will use in this course. You might be surprised to know that Pandas itself has a related library for downloading financial data called Pandas Data Reader. In fact, the story of Pandas is that it was invented in a financial institution by a developer of the name Wes McKinney. Luckily, he was able to convince the company to open source the library for all of us to use. You'll notice that, as you use Pandas more and more, that it's quite popular with people who do quantitative finance, and a lot of its functionality is pretty specific to computations you might want to do in an analysis of financial data. So in Pandas Data Reader, you actually have access to multiple data sources, including Quandl, which we just previously discussed. This is just a wrapper around Quandl and other APIs, so you still need an API key if you want your request to succeed. As before, this is just an exercise in regular programming and reading API documentation, which most of you taking this course will find quite trivial. I'd recommend going through the documentation and checking out what kinds of data you can get access to, if that's something you are interested in learning about. One of the APIs that Pandas connects to is the Alpha Vantage API, which I think is also worth a mention in this lecture. Alpha Vantage is a startup which is backed by Y Combinator, and it has that modern, easy, and accessible feel, which is more common with young companies today. They provide you with a free API that allows you to download financial data, and if you need to go beyond their free limits, which are quite generous, there is a paid tier as well. Their API includes both historical and real-time stock prices, foreign exchange, cryptocurrency, and more. Now pay some attention to the name of this company. You'll see the word alpha used a lot in finance. I think this is a nice tie-in to some of the concepts we will learn about later in this course. Finally, we have the Yahoo Finance API, which is the inspiration for a library we will look at briefly and make use of in this course. I say briefly because once we've downloaded our data and converted it into a CSV, it will no longer be needed. So the Yahoo Finance API is actually a classic API for financial data, and it's always been near the top hit on search engines when you search for financial data, which was the case for many years. However, these days, it's pretty well known that Yahoo is not the company it once was, and in fact, the API was shut down in 2017. However, there is a Python library called YFinance that lets us download historical market data without an API key, which makes it convenient for us to use in this course. This library does not wrap Yahoo's API, but rather it scrapes Yahoo Finance itself. Either way, it works and it's simple, so it's a good fit for us.